Every luxury manufacturer needs a performance division. BMW has M, Mercedes-Benz has AMG, even Volvo has Polestar, and for Lexus, the performance brand is F. That's why today we're out here in the forest taking a look at the 2017 Lexus GS-F. Before we dive right into the GS-F, there are a few things you should know up front. The first thing is I'm suffering from laryngitis right now, so I do apologize for sounding like I have a frog stuck in my throat. The second thing you need to know is that the GS-F is and is not a BMW M5 competitor. The GS-F is like the BMW M5 in that this is the high-performance version of the Lexus GS, just like the M5 is the high-performance version of the BMW 5 Series. Like the M5, the Lexus GS-F receives some body tweaks in order to differentiate this from the standard Lexus GS and in order to improve performance. So we get different quarter panels up front, we get a different front bumper, different rear bumper, different hood, and the vehicle is actually longer than the regular Lexus GS. However, the big difference between the Lexus GS-F and essentially all of the other performance entries in this segment is that we have a naturally aspirated engine under the hood. And this engine is significantly less powerful than the previous generation BMW M5, and it should be significantly less powerful than the all-new 2018 BMW M5 when it comes out. That means in terms of overall performance, this actually is a little bit closer to the Cadillac CTS V-Sport, the Mercedes-Benz E43 AMG, not the E63 AMG, and the BMW 550i. However, it's not quite a BMW 550i either, because the BMW 550i is really just a BMW 540 with a bigger engine under the hood. Lexus has the F badge, and they also have F Sport. The difference is that F is the full-on performance model. F Sport really is more of a looks and handling tweak package, although we do get a front grille that is very similar between the F models and the F Sport models. Very same shape here. We have this spindle design, that's what Lexus refers to it as, and we have these little squiggles that go down instead of a more egg crate design like we see in some of the competition, or the horizontal or vertical slats that we see in other models. The big difference for the GS-F, of course, is that this enormous grille is fully functional because it helps improve the cooling of the vehicle, something that's very important when you're producing this much power. We also have functional ducts right over here on either side. That's why we don't have fog lights on this model. All GS models get full LED headlamps, but the GS-F gets some slightly tweaked ones with this tri-LED module inside. These are full LED units, LED high beams and LED low beams, and an LED daytime running lamp strip that's this sort of Nike swoosh right here. This is not as divorced from the headlamp module as we see in the Lexus IS. This is actually part of the same module when they put a body-colored strip right here to give it that same sort of look that we see in the smaller Lexus. At 193.5 inches long, the GS-F is about 1.5 inches longer than the regular Lexus GS200T or GS350. Even so, the GS is one of the smaller entries in this segment, but the important thing to know about the mid-size luxury sedan segment is that they're all fairly close together, unlike we see in the compact or in the full-size ends of the luxury sedan spectrum. That means that comparatively, the GS is actually fairly close to the large entries in this segment like the Infiniti Q70 or the Genesis G80. From the side profile, the big difference between the GS and the GS-F is this different front end right here in order to accommodate the large 5-liter V8 engine under the hood and the additional cooling demands. And then we also have this vent right here that's functional right in front of the door. That's also different than the regular GS. Out back, we find full LED tail lamps with these very interesting light pipes running right through there. The rest of the lens is clear, so the only red parts are what you actually see illuminated by those light pipes. In order to help differentiate this from the regular Lexus GS model, we get this carbon fiber spoiler rod on top of the trunk lid, and of course we get these quad exhaust tips that are stacked sort of one on top of the other. It's a little bit different than we see in the competition. Normally quad exhaust tips are horizontal from one another, and these are at a slight angle right there. They're not really one on top of the other. Most GS models sold in the United States are likely going to have the base 2-liter 4-cylinder engine, but under this hood you'll find 3 relatively unique engines. We have one of the last remaining naturally aspirated V6 engines, one of the very few hybrid systems in this segment, and one of the last remaining naturally aspirated V8 engines in this segment. As you'd expect, this 5-liter V8 engine is closely related to the V8 that we see under the hood of the Lexus LS, but there are some key differences in addition to the fact that this has a larger displacement. To improve power and efficiency, Lexus equips this particular engine with variable valve timing, direct injection, and multi-port fuel injection, and the ability to operate on the Atkinson cycle. The modified auto cycle that we generally refer to as an Atkinson cycle is what's used in most hybrid vehicles sold in North America, and you'll also find it right here under the hood of a performance car. The reason for that is that it trades torque for efficiency at highway speeds. So if you're driving down the highway, you don't need all 389 pound-feet of torque, so this will actually leave the intake valves open just a little bit longer than normal, giving you an effective different compression ratio that improves efficiency. Power is routed from the engine to the back wheels by an 8-speed automatic transmission. No all-wheel drive is available in the GS-F, and Lexus includes a standard torque vectoring rear axle that can shift power side to side and is actually quite aggressive at doing so in order to help the rear end of the Lexus GS turn. The torque vectoring axle is one of the areas where the GS-F is a little bit different than something like a BMW 550i, which does not get a torque vectoring axle in the rear because it's not the performance model in the lineup, even though it does go 0 to 60 just about as fast as this GS-F. When it comes to front seat comfort, I'm going to have to give the GS-F 7 out of 10 points. A lot of the point reduction comes in the fact that this seat is not as adjustable as you'll find in the competition. We don't have 4-way adjustable lumbar support, we don't have an extending thigh cushion, we don't have adjustable side bolsters, and you can't change the angle of the seat back. Because we're in the Sport model, we have the model that has fixed headrests, not adjustable headrests. That's also a little bit of a ding when it comes to front seat comfort. The aggressive bolstering that these seats offer definitely keeps you planted in the seat, but I actually found the base Lexus GS seats just a little bit more comfortable. We do have a power tilt telescopic steering column with a decent range of motion, and it's linked to a 3-position memory over there on the door. Although the front seats lag the competition a little bit, the back seats are among the most comfortable. I'm going to give these 9 out of 10 points. Headroom is very generous back here. I have about 3/4 of an inch left in the outboard seating position, and the seat itself is fairly comfortable with the seat back angle not too far reclined. Some manufacturers recline the seat back angle just a little bit too much in order to try and give you the appearance of more headroom, and that's not going on in this model. Of course, if we move over to the center seat, then headroom definitely takes a tumble because these outboard seating positions are definitely very bucket shaped. Even with this front passenger seat all the way back at its tracks, I still have about 2 inches of legroom left. I give the GS-F 9 out of 10 points when it comes to our exclusive trunk comfort score. We don't find a power trunk lid because that would add unnecessary weight, but we thankfully do have a handle to help you close the trunk lid. Unfortunately, you won't find a spare tire under this cargo area load floor, but we do have some additional storage space. If we lift out that plastic liner, you'll notice we just get a sheet of sound deadening foam and then some of the electronics for the vehicle. These seats are leather, as you'd expect in a luxury vehicle, and the stitch pattern is very unique to the GS-F model. These lines that run down there right towards the center gives it sort of a human design, and then moving out from there, you'll see that we have that very aggressive bolstering right there on the seat bottom cushion and on the seat back cushion. The front doors are composed of all soft touch plastics, from the soft touch injection molded upper section to the soft touch injection molded lower section. We also have some faux suede inserts right here for the armrest. Unlike some of the European options, you won't find wood trim in the performance version of the GS. We just have carbon fiber right up here. The upper portion of the dashboard in the F trim is this suede-like material, just like we saw on the driver's and passenger's armrests. It's stitched around the instrument cluster and above the infotainment screen. Unfortunately, in my mind, this stitched suede looks a little bit out of place with the injection molded bulk of the dashboard. I actually wish that Lexus had reversed this and put the stitched material along here and then put the injection molded parts a little higher up. In the center of the dashboard, we have this large widescreen infotainment and navigation system. The software is essentially the same as is used in other Toyota and Lexus models, but the dimensions of the screen are quite different. This version of the software allows you to use 1/3 of the screen for a different purpose than the larger 2/3 side over here on the left. So you can have your map or your infotainment or your climate control over there on the right side, and then something different over here on the left. If you want to know more about this infotainment and navigation system, there's a separate video on my channel that goes into this in greater detail. Below the infotainment screen, we have 2 large air vents, an analog clock that is controlled by the infotainment and navigation system, start-stop button right over here, and the tri-zone automatic climate control with a single slot optical disc player. Continuing down from that, we have the controls for our heated and ventilated seats. There's an auto mode, so the car will automatically heat or ventilate based on the interior and exterior temperature, and then we have our cup holders right here behind this door. Now, the only problem I found with this particular design is that when you do have large sodas in here, it is a little bit tricky to fiddle with those seat controls above it, but I did find that the auto mode worked just fine for me. The GS-F uses a very traditional console shifter. It's gated. Drive is all the way down here to the bottom. Manual mode is over to the left. We shift up for up and down for down. There are also paddles on the back of the steering wheel. Below that, we have our drive mode selector. We can select between normal, sport, sport plus, in the eco mode by rotating that knob all the way over to the left. Below that, we have our TVD button. This controls the way the torque vectoring rear axle behaves. There are 3 different modes: standard, slalom, and track. And we also have a snow mode to help improve traction in inclement weather. To the right of the shifter, we find the input method for the infotainment and navigation system. This is very different than the knob-style controllers that we find in the German vehicles. Between the front seats, we find a faux suede armrest. It slides forward and backward. You slide it backwards to reveal the parking sense disable button and have a little bit of access to that console area, or we can open it all the way and get complete access to this area. There's enough room on this tray for large smartphones, right like that, or we can remove the divider. We have access to the whole area where you can put wallets, phones, things like that. We have our auxiliary input here and 2 USB inputs and a 12-volt power outlet. The GS-F gets a unique instrument cluster that is a partial LCD unit. So what we're seeing over here on the left side of the screen and the center, this round section right here, that's all being generated by an LCD. You'll notice that at the moment, the red line for this vehicle is pegged right about 3,750 RPM. That's because we haven't started this vehicle today. So as I depress the brake pedal and actually start the car, you'll notice that the red line will actually start to climb up. The dynamic red line makes sure that you're not overworking the engine until the engine has had a time to warm up a little bit, and it affects the shifts for both the manual and the automatic modes of this transmission. To the left side of the tachometer, we have our typical trip computer information, fuel economy, that sort of thing. We also have some dedicated F gauges, like our torque distribution from the standard torque vectoring rear differential, G-force meter, tire pressure meter, and a lap timer right there. The tachometer changes based on the mode that you're in. So if we're in the eco mode, we don't get a tachometer at all. We get this sort of eco display. And the more ecologically you're driving, the further these little designs go all the way over here to the right side of your screen. If you're driving uneconomically, then they will fall all the way down here. In normal mode, we get a fairly typical tachometer. If we move on over to the sport mode, we get a high contrast version. And you'll notice that the transmission mode indicator has actually become larger than the speedometer below it. And that's so that when we put it in manual mode, you can more easily see what gear you're in. Things change yet further if we move over to Sport Plus. The vehicle actually moves some of those gauges that you saw over there on the left side of your screen right here to the center, and then the speedometer gets shifted off over to the right. At the bottom of the tachometer, we not only see the current drive mode, but also the mode of the torque vectoring rear axle. Can change between standard, slalom, and the track mode. This changes how aggressively that differential will shift power from the left to the right side to help steer the vehicle around corners. The steering wheel is a round 3-spoke design, and we have an F logo right there at the bottom. Some people online have complained about the thickness of this steering wheel rim, but I actually like it. This is just about as thick as the wheels that we find in certain Chrysler, Jeep, and Dodge models. It really is my preference to have a thicker rim. We have sport grips right up top, but none corresponding on the bottom. You'll find the shift paddles on the back, down on the left side of the wheel, up on the right. The first thing you're going to notice about the GS-F out on the road is the fact that this is a naturally aspirated engine, and it does have an absolutely screaming red line. So this is going to sound very different than the turbocharged V8s that we find in the competition. Logically, because we don't have a turbocharger, there is 0 turbo lag in the GS. However, it also means that we have less low-end torque than we find in something like a 550i or a Cadillac Cts V-Sport, or basically any of the other turbocharged options out there. Several of the competition's turbocharged engines will beat this engine's torque score by about 100 foot-pounds, and they'll do it at much lower RPMs than this engine as well. However, if you're looking for a more traditional feel in your sports luxury car, then this is definitely going to be it. However, when it comes to absolute performance figures, the GS-F falls down just a little bit. We ran from 0 to 60 in 4.55 seconds, which is undoubtedly quick. However, it's not as fast as the previous generation M5, and it's definitely not going to be as fast as the new M5 when it finally launches. The reason we know that is because the current generation 550i actually goes from 0 to 60 a hair faster than this Lexus GS-F. The Cadillac Cts V goes from 0 to 60 a full second faster than the Lexus, and I expect that the BMW M5 and the Mercedes-Benz E63 AMG will be right around that same 3.5, 3.6 second time when they launch. That leaves all of them faster than the GS-F from 0 to 60. In terms of 0 to 60 time, this is very close to the E43 AMG, the Cadillac CTS V-Sport, the BMW 550i, and the 5-liter V8 in the brand new Genesis G80 sedan. A 4.5 second 0 to 60 time is certainly nothing to sniff at, and this is unquestionably faster than a BMW 540i, a Volvo S80 T6, or any of the other mainstream V6 or turbocharged V6 competition. In our braking tests, it took 118 feet to stop this vehicle from 60 miles an hour down to 0. That's about 5 to 6 feet longer than the last GS350 that we tested. The reason is likely because of the V8 engine under the hood. It does add weight to the vehicle, even though the GS-F is one of the lighter entries in this segment. At just over 4,000 pounds, this is notably lighter than a BMW 550i, and that really does help the handling feel of the vehicle. Lexus has long had a dedication to handling feel and steering precision. It's very obvious in the Lexus IS, the Lexus GS, the Lexus RC, and even the Lexus LS in the large sedan segment. Effectively, the torque vectoring axle does a very similar thing to the four-corner steering that you see in some of the competition. It helps the rear end of the vehicle be involved in the steering of the vehicle. This is one of the more aggressive torque vectoring axles that I have driven. Basically what's going on is, as we're approaching this corner up here, it's a right-hand turn, so we start to turn right, we add some power, and the vehicle is actually going to send more oomph to the left wheel in the rear. That helps cause the vehicle to pivot slightly to the right, and the difference is definitely noticeable in the GS-F. A lot of vehicles out there that have torque vectoring axles, you can't really feel too much difference between the vehicle with the torque vectoring axle and the vehicle without the torque vectoring axle, unless you're on a track or you're really driving the car hard. It feels very natural, but it also feels much more precise and much more direct than we find in the 5 Series or the Mercedes-Benz E-Class. The Mercedes-Benz E-Class has always been a fairly soft entry in this particular segment, and over time the 5 Series has joined it. The difference in suspension tuning between the GS and the GS-F, or the GS-F and something like a BMW 550i, is most noticeable out here on a gravel road. We definitely feel more of the bumps on this kind of pavement than we do in some of the softer sprung entries in this segment. Now, we do have an adaptive suspension in the GS-F, so it does firm it up even further, especially if you put it in the Sport Plus mode, and then it is seriously firm for travel on a gravel road. When it comes to cabin noise, I'm going to give this a B, because at 50 miles an hour we scored 70 decibels in steady state travel in 8th gear. This engine will definitely make an awful lot of noise if you let it, and so which gear you're in really will affect your cabin noise score. Over a weekend, about 600 miles of driving, the fuel economy in the GS-F has been fairly impressive, and that surprised me just a little bit because of the EPA score. The EPA says you should get about 19 miles per gallon. We've been averaging about 20 miles per gallon in very mixed driving. The reason for that is likely the Atkinson cycle, the 8-speed automatic transmission, and the fact that this is a naturally aspirated engine. The turbocharged engines from the competition do very well in EPA tests, but if you start pushing those vehicles a little bit harder, if you start having a little bit more fun, or incidentally, if you're living in a hotter climate, then you'll get lower fuel economy than the EPA says that you should get in those engines. Bottom line driving comparisons for the GS-F are a little bit tricky because, again, this is not quite a BMW M5 or an E63 AMG or a Cadillac CTS V competitor, but neither is it very directly a CTS V-Sport or a BMW 550i competitor. In many ways, this is closer to the Mercedes-Benz E43 AMG in terms of overall character, because this is a dedicated performance model. There are some significant body changes in order to make this vehicle. The suspension is quite firm, and it has features like that torque vectoring rear axle that you don't find in something like a BMW 550i. As you'd logically expect, the GS-F is the most expensive form of the Lexus GS. It starts at $83,496 for the 2017 model year. That comes standard with the 467 horsepower V8 engine and just about everything else that's optional on all the other Lexus GS trims. There are relatively few options on the GS-F, although the heads-up display and the Mark Levinson sound system are still optional, but adding both of them will only increase your price by a little over $2,000. That makes the base price of the GS-F about $20,000 more expensive than the Lexus GS 450 hybrid and about $33,000 over the Lexus GS 350. So the GS-F is very obviously the most exclusive version of the Lexus GS. But how it compares with the competition is a little bit tricky, as I said earlier, because the GS-F is significantly less expensive than an Audi RS7, significantly less expensive than a Mercedes-Benz E63 AMG, and definitely less expensive than the last generation BMW M5. The only mid-size performance luxury sedan that is similar in base price to the Lexus GS-F is the Cadillac Cts V at $85,595. But the Cadillac is significantly more powerful than the Lexus. It has a 640 horsepower supercharged V8 engine under the hood, and it can go from 0 to 60 in 3.6 seconds. It would go faster if it could find the traction, but there is so much power going to the rear wheels in that Cadillac CTS V, it spends a good amount of time spinning its wheels. It's a very different experience versus the Lexus GS-F. In many ways, the Lexus GS-F is alone in this category, but we'll start out with the closest competitor, which would be the brand new Mercedes-Benz E43 AMG. Mercedes is now offering 3 different E-Class AMG models. We have the E43 AMG, the E63 AMG, and the E63S AMG. The 6-cylinder Mercedes may not sound as nice as the GS-F, and it may not have that naturally aspirated power curve that people love, but it's going to go from 0 to 60 just about as fast, and it's likely going to be just about as exclusive as well. If that's not enough oomph for you in the Mercedes lineup, we have the E63 AMG at 563 horsepower, or we have the E63S at 603 horsepower. And those two vehicles will go from 0 to 60 a full second faster than the Lexus GS-F. That is significantly more powerful. One of the big differences between the Mercedes performance vehicles and the Lexus performance vehicles is that Lexus, like BMW, doesn't seem to believe in all-wheel drive for their performance cars. They want that solid rear-wheel drive driving dynamic, and you do lose a little bit of that with all-wheel drive. On the flip side, however, Mercedes is adding all-wheel drive because it allows you to harness all of that power. It definitely makes those cars easier to drive in adverse weather like snow or rain. When it comes to luxury features and luxury feel, it's obvious that the E-Class is newer than the Lexus GS. It has a much fresher cabin, and Mercedes has definitely made it a point to take their vehicles up a notch versus their last generation products. So the E-Class has definitely the most luxurious and most nicely appointed interior in this segment. Next up, we have the Cadillac CTS, which I think is an excellent competitor to the Lexus GS, because the Cadillac CTS and the Lexus GS both have some of the best driving dynamics in this segment. The Lexus GS and the Cadillac definitely beat the BMW, the Mercedes, and the Audi when it comes to neutral handling feel. You'll notice that I said feel, not grip, because you'll actually find slightly better road holding ability in some of the German vehicles out there thanks to wider tires and just the general design of the vehicle. However, when it comes to feel, Cadillac and Lexus are definitely tops in this segment. Both of those manufacturers were really after having a very precise steering feel, having as much steering feedback as possible coming back from the road to the driver. The other reason the Cadillac is a good competitor to the GS is because we have a CTS V-Sport and a CTS V. The CTS V is the over 600 horsepower competitor to the E63, the RS7, the BMW M5, etc. But the CTS V-Sport is a little bit closer to what we see in the Lexus GS-F. It uses a twin-turbo V6 engine to produce 420 horsepower. Again, like we saw in the Mercedes, that's a little bit less power than we see in the GS-F, but because of the way that engine delivers the power, it ends up only being a hair slower than the GS-F. It goes from 0 to 60 in 4.7 seconds in our tests. Some people have seen 4.6 seconds out of it. The V-Sport is notably less expensive than the GS-F. It starts at $61,250 for its base form and $71,425 when comparably equipped to the Lexus. That's about a $12,000 discount. The overall theme of the CTS V is perhaps a little bit more hardcore than the GS-F, but the CTS V-Sport is not quite as hardcore as we see in the GS-F, so we don't get things like that torque vectoring rear axle that we do find in the GS-F, and you don't find quite as many dedicated performance tweaks from the regular CTS to the CTS V-Sport. The V-Sport is designed to be a very middle-of-the-road option between the regular 3.6-liter V6 engine in the CTS and the top-end fire-breathing CTS V. And that's why we don't see all of the features that we see in the CTS V or in the GS-F in that mid-range model. For 2017, BMW has given us a brand new twin-turbo 550i that will start at $66,300, approximately $77,000 comparably equipped to the GS-F. Of course, you cannot get things like the torque vectoring rear axle in the 550i, and it's not a dedicated performance model, so it's going to be a little bit more popular, a little bit more common than the GS-F. However, with 455 turbocharged horsepower under the hood and an 8-speed automatic transmission, the 550i will go from 0 to 60 in 4.3 seconds in rear-wheel drive form. You'll actually get slightly better grip in the all-wheel drive form, which you can get in the United States, and it's probably going to go from 0 to 60 about 1/10 of a second faster. Although the 550i is going to be faster than the GS-F, its mission is a little bit different. The 550i is the standard version of the 5 Series. It's not the performance version. So it's going to have a suspension that's a little bit softer. It's going to definitely roll more in the corners. It's not necessarily going to feel quite as comfortable going around a track at speed as the GS-F. However, it's going to be faster in a straight line. So if you're looking for real-world performance, the 550i is definitely going to beat the GS-F every time. It's just not going to sound as much fun, it's not going to be as much fun out on a track, and it's not going to have that naturally aspirated feel that we find in the GS-F. On the flip side, it is going to be less expensive. The 550i is one of the big reasons that I said the GS-F is sort of an M5 competitor and sort of not an M5 competitor, because the last generation M5 started at $94,100, which is about $10,000 more than the GS-F, and the new M5 is expected to be about $100,000 starting, so definitely much more expensive than the Lexus. On the Audi front, we have the S6, which starts at $70,900. That will get you 450 horsepower and from 0 to 60 in 3.9 seconds. That's about 0.6 of a second faster than the GS-F. There is no RS6 at this moment, so we have to go over to the 7 in order to find that performance model. And the RS7 will set you back $110,700. It's significantly more expensive, but it will go from 0 to 60 in around 3.3 seconds if you get the version with 605 horsepower. As with the other options in this segment, I prefer the handling dynamics and handling feel of the GS-F to the S6 or the RS7. However, the delta between the Lexus and the Audi is larger than the delta between the Lexus and the BMW or the Lexus and the Mercedes. The main reason for that is the design of the Audi Quattro system. Because the front axle is integrated into the same case as the transmission, the entire engine is in front of the front axle. And that means we have a weight balance in the S6 and RS7 that is more similar to your average front-wheel drive car than your average all-wheel drive or rear-wheel drive car. The difference is very noticeable in neutral handling situations. So when you're not applying the brakes and you're not applying power to the vehicle, you're just turning a corner in neutral handling, the GS-F is much more willing to turn in than the Audi model. The Audi model is going to tend to plow in the corner, it's going to tend to understeer a little bit and not really be as willing to turn into the corner. Audi tries to compensate for this as much as possible in the RS7 by giving that some insanely wide tires, but we don't see that same kind of compensation in the S6. The S6 versus the GS-F, the S6 is definitely going to be faster 0 to 60, but it's not going to be quite as much fun on winding mountain roads. Now that doesn't mean the GS-F is going to be faster on your favorite winding mountain road. I would actually say the S6 is probably going to be a little bit faster around a track unless the track is very small and very winding. There's absolutely no question the Lexus GS-F is an absolute hoot to drive in this segment. It's the only naturally aspirated performance entry left in America. So if you're looking for a more traditional driving dynamic, the best steering feel, the best handling feel, the GS-F is definitely a solid option to go for. The trouble with the GS-F is that it doesn't exist in a vacuum. There are so many other options in this segment that will go from 0 to 60 faster than it, and some of them will be less expensive as well. Exactly where you rank the GS-F really depends on your priorities. That said, however, if my money were on the line in this segment, I would take the BMW 550i, and I'd probably take the all-wheel drive version. I know it's not going to be as much fun as a rear-wheel drive GS-F, but it's going to go from 0 to 60 faster. It's also going to be a little bit more comfortable inside the cabin. Again, the 550i has a very different mission than the GS-F. It's not a dedicated performance vehicle, so that comparison is just a little bit tricky. The E43 AMG is going to be my runner-up in this segment. It has easily the most luxurious interior in this segment, and I really like the way the exterior is done in the current E-Class. Although the BMW and the Mercedes take the top awards, the GS-F is definitely a can't-go-wrong pick in this segment because the Lexus is likely going to be far more reliable over the long term than either the 550i or the E43. It's really too early to tell what resale value will be like, but I don't expect it to be vastly different between the E43 AMG and the Lexus GS-F. Thanks for taking the time to check out this video. Again, I'm Alex Dykes, and this has been the Lexus GS-F. Be sure and hit that subscribe icon down there at the bottom of your screen. Check out the related videos on the side of your screen, and I'll see you next week.